in America, because it's not a culture that values its artists, that you do have to find, like, we don't have much institutional or national support. You have to find what job most complements what you're doing. There's some writers who are just very performative, and then there's some writers who are just more authentic people. You know, it's just like with any artist, like, not all great writers, not all really good writers are great people.
Ciao ragazzi, welcome to the next episode of Diavolo Toscano. Your host, Luke Gamrot. Very happy to see you again, but I'm glad to see Chanelle today because she just came from USA. She's a writer, you're a writer, very successful writer, like we spoke recently. So that's what I really want to know about. What is the feeling to be like a successful writer in USA, for example? That's a good beginning, I think.
You know, it's hard to feel successful in the US without a book. So once you have a book and it's in stores, you know, it's an amazing feeling to go into a bookstore and like see your book up there. But I also think it's, you know, it's like this very private process of writing the book, working on the book, and like before the book happens, for like for like a month out or so. You know, I had my publisher's press person, like, you know, sending me, you know, like the Oprah magazine, like, listed the book, or different magazines listed it. And then, you know, some people want to do interviews and that kind of stuff. So that feels really exciting. But the day the book actually comes out, which is a Tuesday, it's like crickets. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing. There's no like great big fanfare. It's just kind of like you send out an email to everybody you know saying like, my book is coming out, and then it's out. And that's kind of it until you do some kind of like reading or event where you're experiencing people who are like listening to you read and maybe buying the book or asking you questions. But it's sort of, you know, it goes back to being a very quiet life. It's not like other art forms, I think.
I always say that that is literally the best way to being successful and famous, to be a writer, because you're recognized just by intelligent people, not like people in the restaurant, like teenagers who just want to take a photo with you. So that's great. But what is the difference? Like, what was the hardest part of that process of writing and process of publishing book? Maybe not just writing was hard, it was something else.
In the US, once you have an agent, there's still, that agent is like your salesperson. Like, they believe in your book, they want to champion your book, and then they have to go to the different publishers they have relationships with and talk you up and talk your book up, and then eventually it goes like out and they'll send different samples, and then you just have to sit and wait for people to read the samples. And then if somebody's interested, then they'll have a phone call with you. And that's always awkward because it's a stranger who you know is interested in your book, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to like pitch an offer for your book. So they want to talk to you about your book, but you don't really know what to expect. So you're just on this long conversation, which sometimes feels like you're interviewing them, but sometimes feels like they're interviewing you. Sometimes those conversations, you know, the person's just very complimentary. Sometimes they're offering revisions. Sometimes they're like weirdly critical. So I think the hard thing is to realize that every time you reach a new step or milestone, that there's still a lot of rejections on the way. Like, you'll have gone through that and it'll be like, oh, actually the person doesn't want to buy the book now. And you're like, what did I, you know what I mean? Did I say something? Like, what was it? And it could be any number of things, some things that have nothing to do with you. But I think just the continual rejection.
I think that's the reason why it's better to publish your book or try to like start this process when you are older, because you used to be rejected so many times in your life, in work, love, or stuff like that. It's nothing big for you. And now I can see why it could be very difficult when you are young, like really, really, really young. You have, I don't know, 20 or 80, and you know wrote something and try to publish it. It could be hard.
Yeah, and I also think the person you are when you're doing readings and answering questions, that and like marketing, hustling for your book, that's a different person than the person who needs to write. And so I think it's important to always be working on something new when your book is out in the world, because you're also receiving reviews and you know all of the different, like all this feedback information, some of which is useful, most of which is not. So I think it's important to be working on something away from that that's like just yours.
So take a step back, and I want to ask how to find a good agent in USA. Like, I think it's the most difficult part of this job, because if you are like from nowhere, you didn't, you know, make a tremendous work on that writing field, it's hard. So how you did it?
How did I do it?
How?
So I think that at one point I was in the theater and I was acting, and I was sort of I kept writing on the side, and a friend of mine suggested going to graduate school, but I didn't really want to at that point, and I didn't know much about it, and I didn't want to spend money. So I just went to a writing conference, which was like a week long. It was at Colgate University or college in upstate New York. And when I was there, I did a novel workshop, and my workshop leader really encouraged me with my novel, and he actually helped me send it out to a few agents, and I got some interest, but I didn't get anything big, which was probably for the best because the book wasn't very good. But I did decide after having that like immersive week where I was like going to craft talks and being in workshop, and that I wanted more of that time and space that I wasn't able to get in New York. Because although New York City is, you know, a place of like, you know, it's amazing and it's fun and there's tons of artists there and there's so many things going on, it doesn't give you time and space, which are the things you need to write.
So what was the key reason for you to, like, after, like, during that conference, that you decided, okay, that's the part of my life what would be like very important for me, I want to change from actress to writing? Because of what was the key reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd always been writing, and I just thought like my masterpiece was just going to happen. You know what I mean? And I didn't think it was anything I needed to necessarily work on, except to continue to write. But I mean, my acting career in New York wasn't going very well. You know, when I was in acting school, I felt like an artist. We were like making theater, you know? And when I was in New York, I was in like terrible plays with terrible directors, you know, in terrible venues. And just, you know, I didn't feel like an artist anymore. And when I went to the writing residency, I just felt, or the writing conference, I felt like this is the thing that, you know, acting and theater are kind of like my first great love, you know what I mean? The thing that I wanted to be as a kid. But writing to me, it wasn't even like a vocation. It was just like breathing. It was something I just was always doing. And so it just felt more necessary. And for me, when I decided to just be a writer, it was a big relief, because acting is so, it's not something you can do by yourself, really. You need at least an audience. It's a collaborative art. And writing, you don't need other people. It's not about how you look and all of those things. And just like...
So you just hate people.
Yeah. I mean, I am an introvert, but I think a lot of actors are. But I think it just felt so much more natural and felt like attainable too. And so then I started writing more and working on what I had, the novel that I had, and I started applying to master's programs, so Master's of Fine Arts. And I had debt from my undergrad, so I knew I could only apply to places that were funded.
Okay.
And so I did. And I happened to get into Syracuse University. Then I worked, you know, for 3 years with my cohort there. And then at the end, we had a writer come in and workshop, you know, little excerpts of our stories. And he read one of my stories, and he asked if I had an agent, and I said no. And so he passed it along to her, and her and I met and talked, and she's become my agent. It
sounds like pretty easy, like that. Okay, but a lot of people who try to do that, they manage a lot of problems. For example, with money. What is a money problem on the beginning? That because it sounds like, okay, I just decided that actors is not my thing. Now I started to work on writing, and that was so easy. I believe that just. Sound like that.
I mean, the whole time when I say I decided to, I wasn't making any money acting, and I didn't start making money writing. I was always working.
Okay.
I always had some terrible job most of the time.
What was the most terrible?
I had a terrible job in New Orleans after I graduated grad school, because even though I had an agent, it took time for my book to happen. Like that happened years later. So I had a job in New Orleans where I was this woman's assistant. Like her executive assistant, but also her personal assistant. So she would just, it was like the Devil Wears Prada. Like she was so terrible, except without the Prada, like no glamour whatsoever. So she was just calling me, and I just have like these panic attacks, and just, you know, she didn't use email. She didn't use a computer. She had like a BlackBerry. but she would just dictate emails to me, and she'd just open magazines and be
So
like,
you
I
were
want to talk
writing.
to this person.
So you were a writer.
Yeah.
Like in some funny way.
I would get home from my job, 6 or 7, and I would write for an hour at least. And then I would, after work, and then on the weekends, I would write.
How you find the strength to do that? Like, because to be honest, after like when I finished my job, oh my God, after 6 or 7 p.m., I just don't have any strength to do anything creative. I just want to die from time to time. And of course, there is a weekend and the short period when we can take a rest. So how you did it? How you found the force to do that?
I mean, I think part of it was just like I was exhausted, but I also wanted to escape that job, and I knew that wasn't going to happen without it. And at the time, I was working on short stories, so I could really concentrate on each story. And I also had a few readers, so I knew that I need to send this to them in a week, so that helped. And sometimes, like, some people, you realize, like, some people work better in the morning or something like that. So I knew I had it in me to work for an hour. And then that was it.
Okay.
It's just an hour. And then Saturday I could work for 3 or 4 in the morning.
Okay.
After I woke up, and then I would go out and do things, So I think you set modest goals, and you let yourself write when you don't feel like writing. That's important. You write badly, you just do it. Okay. And set goals within that. So I think that's important, because even though I went to grad school and I had an agent, it took me time, because I only had a few stories to accrue enough for a book. At that time I lived in Houston, so I had a different job, but I was always working and doing jobs that were not the thing that I wanted to be doing.
So you believe it, like you were determined to do that, like.
Yeah, and I think in America, at least, when you publish a book with a good publisher, and it doesn't have to be huge, that is not going to materially change your life unless you're like Jonathan Franzen or Stephen King or something like that. But it is going to open doors for you, because once your book is published, then you start to do readings where you might meet other writers, or you get invited to a festival where you meet other writers, or somebody asks you to come do something, or another writer works at a university and then they ask you to come give a talk. And so then you get paid a little bit for that. You know what I mean? So you start to get these other things, and also it allowed me to become a professor. It opens other jobs up for you, and then also just other ways of making money. But I don't think you can come into it, especially not in the US, with the idea that I'm just going to be a writer and that's the way I'm going to make my money. If that happens, great. I did when I got my first advance, when I was first paid for the book, I thought, okay, I can take this money and I can not work for a year, but then what? I'll be back in the same.
I need to write two more books.
Yeah, but then that'll only give me, you don't know how much money you're going to get next time. So I just thought, like, that's not worth it. Like, I'll save some money and this will, like, soften things for me, or I can take, like, a longer break, those kind of things. But I don't want to, like, use all this money up. So I think, you try to find what that job might be, because not everybody wants to be, I'm a professor of creative writing, so I basically teach creative writing. Not everybody wants that to be their job. Not everybody wants to teach. That's not conducive for everybody for your writing. So I think you do have to find, like, at least in America, because it's not a culture that values its artists, that you do have to find, like, we don't have much institutional or national support. You have to find what job most complements what you're doing.
Okay. Do you like other writers? Like, what do you think about other writers? Like,
yeah.
Don't lie, please. What's the biggest problem with them?
Oh, they're all so different. There's as many different kinds of writers as there are, colors in the world.
Okay, so picture that you go on a boat and boat crash, and you are on the, like, lonely island with like 20 writers.
Oh God.
Okay, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, I think there's definitely gonna be some arguments. Yeah, I don't know how we're gonna survive or feed ourselves.
Okay, now we need to write some guide how to survive on a lonely island.
Yeah. No, I think you have trusted writers who have similar perceptions of what they consider good work. For me to feel connected to another writer, they don't have to like exactly the same things as me, but I do think there are some, like, perceptions and value things that we, like, share in common. I'm very interested in language, so you know, I wouldn't be able to like engage much with a writer who is less interested in that. So I think, you know, there's some writers who are just very performative, and then there's some writers who are just more authentic people. You know, it's just like with any artist, like not all great writers, not all really good writers are great people.
Yeah, from time to time. But you stuck on one lonely island with one writer. It's your husband. Like, how is living with the other writer? It's hard job?
Most of the time, not really, because we met in writing school, and we're different kind of writers. I think if our work was more similar, maybe there would be more kind of like envy. But I think because he also writes poetry, he also writes essays, he also writes nonfiction. So he has a lot of, I just really write fiction, and that's where I'm comfortable. And he also loves writing novels more than I do, and I prefer to write short stories, even though I'm working on a novel. So I think, you know, those differences help. He's my best reader, you know. I mean, there's always going to be, I think when you're in a relationship in general with somebody who has some kind of career or ambition, there's always going to be moments where their career is moving along faster than yours is, and vice versa. So, you know, or you're making more money than them, so you're the breadwinner. Or, you know, moments where they have more free time and you're the one who's miserable because you have no free time. So I think you just have to kind of be, you know, sympathetic and try to make up for that. But then, you know, there's also other times where it's sort of like you need to ask for what you need from them as well. So I think we try to be equal in terms of like, you need your time to write and I need my time to write. And we also have children, so it's sort of like, let's figure that out. But I think just understanding that the world is full of inequities, and that's going to be shifting. Okay,
that's how I try to picture that. And I've got my best friend who is a writer. Like, we've got like a big competition between us from the beginning, but we are the best friend. But I can picture that that thing in a relationship. Like, it could be hard. Like, oh my God, you wrote 20 pages last week and I did nothing. My God, it's so hard. I hate you. Go sleep in the bedroom.
But yeah, I mean, you don't live with your best friend, so you have to kind of temper that. I mean, yeah, there's moments where, even on this residency, like he was working on poems, he got more work done than I did. It's sort of like one of my best friends likes to say, compare and despair. Like, there's always somebody you can look at and be like, oh, what are they doing? You know what I mean? They're doing better. And I think that doesn't change even when you are at the top of the top of the top. There's always somebody who's got something that you don't have, or is, you know, producing more, or that kind of thing. And I think it's also about like choices. Like, I have 2 small children, and I knew that having my second child would slow me down, and it did. And so definitely, like, I have a colleague who just like is publishing her 4th or 5th book, maybe her 5th book, and I'm working on my 3rd. So there's definitely a part of me that's like, well, if I hadn't had the baby, then I would, you know what I mean? But take back my son.
After 2 weeks with them in one place.
Yeah, but I think, you know, but then on the other hand, there's things that like my experience with my son has given me. I mean, other than obvious ones like love and all those things, but also like there's certain perspectives and stories I got out of that.
What kind of perspective? What changed until that moment?
Well, I mean, you mean with just being a mother in general, or the second one?
I don't know what is the difference, because I don't have any. So you can start on the beginning, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just that somebody else is the center of your life. There's pros and cons to that. One is just having to sacrifice that kind of like time and energy. But the other, I think, is that a lot of the bullshit, I wouldn't say I have less anxiety in some ways, but I do not worry about the same things I used to worry about. I do not care about some of the superficial things I used to care about, like what other people think of me has gone down quite dramatically. I don't have time. Even sometimes where like something might happen, or I might worry about something and I would like stay up and like really think about it for days. Now it's in my mind, but it like floats out because there's just too much going on. Like, kids are very present. They're asking stuff like in the moment. So I often forget about things. I'm like, oh, shouldn't I be worrying about that? You know, so for me, that's been really helpful. And I also think like they're demanding, but they're also just very demanding about the present moment. Like, they don't really care whether you're cool or, you know, all those things. They're just sort of like, well, I want my snack now. So I don't. And so I think that that's helpful. And I also just think for me personally, like most of my life have been a very like lonely person. And I'm not lonely anymore. And I also do value my alone time, and I do have alone time, but I think that the way I used to feel lonely, I have like a family now, because my family is very complicated, and so I don't feel that way anymore. And that's like a huge like support to me, that's not something I have to sort of like worry about or feel emotional about, that I can just concentrate on my work. But I do have less time, so the time I have to just really use it, which doesn't mean I'm necessarily like churning out pages, but I am working like more of a focus when I have the time. Because I knew I didn't want to be one of these writers who was just like, oh, well, I didn't write for 5 or 10 years when my kids were little. I mean, there's definitely moments where I'm like, you know, for example, when I'm in my spring semester between my kids and my job, that's when my job is like the most busy. I know that I'm not going to be able to like be clocking pages for a novel. There's some things I can do, but it's not going to be that. I'm going to have to do it in the break before and the break after, and I'll be able to like touch it, but that's it. So I will kind of knuckle down in those times before. There's something to be said, I guess is what the long-winded way of saying, there's something to be said for restraints and having like something to push against. I'm the kind of person, if I don't have a job at all and I have all the time in the world, I'm not going to be as productive. I need at least one thing during the day or something where I have to be, or some kind of demand that makes me kind of confined.
If you could find or choose one thing in your life to change, what it would be?
Short of like world justice and all that kind of stuff.
No, in your personal life.
In my personal life, money.
Money?
Yeah.
Like you want to make more money? Okay, but okay, so step back to to the lifetime, and if you can change one thing, what can bring you to that purpose, for example, to that goal, what it would be? You won't go to the art school, like actor school, theater school, or is there something what you like, okay, that was a mistake, I want to change it?
Oh, I see. A mistake.
No, especially it don't need to
something you would have done differently.
Yeah, like first, what is in your mind, like first thing?
When I decided to become a writer after that writers conference, it was such like a revelation that I think I thought it was a revelation like for my whole life, and I just wanted to change everything. Okay. So I decided I was not only gonna like now focus on writing, but I was going to leave New York, because I had a roommate who was moving to Austin, Texas, and I was going to, live there and apply there. Now, had I ever been to Austin, Texas? No. Did I have a car, which is what you need in Texas? No. Did I have a driver's license? No.
Okay.
Did I have that much money? No. Did I have a job there? No. Did I have an apartment, or did I know anybody that lived there? No. I also only had my old green card from when I was 6 years old that didn't have an expiration date on it, but was probably expired, and I didn't have a driver's license or any other ID. Oh. And then I found out just as I was about to leave that my passport had expired. So I had no ID, very little money, and I only could like get past like a month of living there. And right as I left, the recession hit. Okay. So there was like no jobs. Okay. And I regret that. I mean, it worked out in the end, but I regret it because it was just chaos, and I was really isolated there. I had an apartment for a little while, but I didn't really care for my roommate. I was just, not... Roommate
is like a fancy word for someone in relationship.
No, it's who you live with. Like if
I know what this means, but why you move with your roommate?
No, I moved to a different roommate. She was in a different place. This was just somebody I found to be my roommate. Okay.
Hello, now we've got Nico. Ciao, Nico.
Say ciao.
Okay, we've finished on that. One thing, what do you want to change?
I was in Austin just in the worst, position possible. And I think it's just kind of this rash thinking that when you're younger, you get an impulse that feels like intuition. Yeah. And so you just do the least practical, most dramatic thing, and it's kind of like out of the frying pan into the fire.
That's youth. Like, it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, but I was 30, I think, so it wasn't,
Still young.
Still youngish. But it also, there are more painful consequences when you're not 20, and so I just feel like it added a certain amount of chaos that's not conducive to writing, that's not conducive to having like a full sense of self, to having like a community and all those things, which I think one does benefit from. And it just caused a lot of like, it caused a big mess, and I had to sort of like move back home with my mom and stepdad, which was terrible. For a little bit, and then finally like work myself out of that. And luckily, you know, grad school happened shortly after that, which was kind of like a loophole, because it was sort of like I dismantled my life without building any foundation for a new one. So I was sort of at a loss.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would take that back. That was...
But you mentioned about that one thing, and that's interesting, and I think it's one of the final questions. You mentioned about money, that's some, I don't want to say issue, but that's something what you wanted to change, like to have more money. Why? Like, you know, you've got something, like there is some sentence that person with money but without anything more is just a poor person. You've got like a big thing, like a lot of really rich people, I think, are envy you. Like they really wanted to have a sense of in their life that they do something what's important, and you have it. What I mentioned from the experience, that kind of problem with money is related to your childhood and the family, and that you didn't have money when you were young. Is it like you didn't work that process with money from life, or what is the like what the money can give you?
Yeah, I mean, what money can give me now, and just when I was younger, I think, you know, had I had more money, I wouldn't have had to work bad jobs for so long, because at some point when you're in your 30s, it is kind of feeling, and you're working like a temporary job or something, it is sort of feeling like, how much longer is this going to go on, you know, like working a crappy job at 22 with, you know, kind of abusive boss is very different than when you're sort of 32 and, you know, not working for much more money. But I also, in the US, college, especially on the undergraduate level, is so prohibitively expensive that most people in my generation and a little younger have a lot of debt. So I have a lot of debt. I've been able to pay off some of that debt with my book money, but imagine if I hadn't had to have used $40,000 of my book money to that, you know, like, you know, or maybe I would have been able to come to somewhere like Italy, not when I'm 43, but 10 years earlier, you know, like I would have loved to travel more and do things that, you know, you can do when you have savings. You know, the only reason I'm able to own a house right now is because I live in Syracuse, which is not that desirable place to live, so it's cheap. I mean, I'm comfortable and happy there, but it's not, you know, it's not a place with expensive real estate or anywhere near it.
What's your most desired place in the world, where you wanted to live?
I don't know. I mean, I think I don't think there's any place I want to settle, you know, for a long time. But I think I would like to live, you know, in Paris for a year or something, or for a couple of years, something like that. I would just like to, you know, go around to places. My family is from Antigua, my dad's side, so I would love to like live there for a little while, or at least have a house that I could go there, which is not that expensive in some ways, but more expensive than I have anyway. I think part of the money thing is I would just like to not have debt. Like I still have some to pay off. And, you know, like my husband and I only have one car, which most of the time is okay, but we can walk to work. But if we ever need to go anywhere else, it's sort of like, you know, or pick up a kid, you know, it's sort of like, well, you know, you can take the car and or just like a bigger car, like where we can barely fit these kids in the car because we just have a tiny little Prius. So I think it's hard to be an artist and have debt. And in the US, most people of my generation do. If you're not wealthy, most of them have debt, like considerable amount of debt from school. And so I think to be free of that and to be able to actually save would be freeing, you know, because it's even like, well, something goes wrong with the house, like our door handle isn't working right now. You know, it's like, well, you know, I'm living not paycheck to paycheck, but close. So it's sort of like, well, I guess maybe in a couple weeks we can fix that, but the upstairs cabinet is going to have to wait. So I just think some of those things.
And children cost them money, I hear that.
They do.
I don't have children, so I can live in a villa in Italy, so you know.
Well, it also depends, I think, where you do live, because what's their education, like, is it free or not? You know, if their healthcare, is it free or not?
Yeah, but I hear that from my friends that That's like the biggest expensive in your life.
You know, like it's cheap.
Education, like extra.
Yeah. So I think the way they're the most expensive is really just like
to take care of them, like
their education, their childcare.
Okay.
That's the most expensive, childcare and like medical. But otherwise, their clothes are cheap.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
if you get one older and the younger,
then,
it's
then he's wearing the same thing. So, you know, their clothes are cheap. They don't eat that much. You know, I mean, if you have to buy them a flight at this age, once they're past 2, they cost as much as a regular person. But otherwise.
So that's not like a pinky word for an artist, like to be a writer, publish a book, and live on the beach, like in the California beach all the time. Like it's a hard work still. You need to pay attention about what you are doing. Like it's not enough. Where is the limit? Like where is the magic line for the writer in US? Because you know, when I try to see your market from the European point of view, for example, especially from Polish point of view, where we have like 38 millions of citizens, and I think that without the young and very old, there will be like a couple of million potential readers, and still there is like 2% of people who buy a book. So it's like quite different world, because you've got the 300 million people in US. Where is the line? Like how to get it? Like,
what?
There's a snail under the table.
A snail?
Yeah.
That's okay.
But why is it not moving?
I don't know. Go see the cat.
How to get that magic line? How to crush that magic line?
Where did you get it? This finger?
Be careful. Don't have children. That was... I think that was like a dramatic end of this interview, when I tried to know what is the difference between a successful writer and unsuccessful, and now I know, like, maybe children, maybe not children, we will see. I hope everything will be okay there, and that finger don't need to be cut. I hope so. So maybe we'll back, or maybe no, but for now I want to thank you, and especially thanks Chanelle, for that interview. I hope she will be back, like my cat, and the children will alive. The child will be alive. Thank you. Yeah, that was the next episode of the Diavolo Toscano, the greatest and the funniest podcast in the world. I hope we will see each other soon. So, ciao.